All right, so in this one, we're going to make an even more advanced version of a reusable input. Now, of course, neither one of these had to be just one single input. They could be a collection of inputs, but it's a lot easier when you use them as one input for the function-based version of what I'm doing. If you wanted to have multiple, this is what you would end up doing. So it's actually not a whole lot different than the component we've been working on. And I'm going to just call this class, and I'll just say my custom text component. That's a mouthful. I probably wouldn't end up calling that in the long run, but this is all about learning. So let's go ahead and just leave it as that. Of course, it is now a component, right? So this is, again, one of those key features of React. You can make things really, really small if you want. And we're going to go ahead and render out some sort of return. And what do we want to return here? So I'm going to go ahead and return two inputs themselves. Okay, so we now have two inputs coming in here. And notice that I can absolutely use this. Yeah, you're going to have to wrap the whole thing in a div. But I can actually reference all of these things exactly the same because it is still that same component. I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to show you yet another way to actually render out a reference that you would use pretty much only in this context, and like with a reusable input or an input block. Right? So this is going to be an input block. Yeah, why don't we call it that? My input block. Yeah. So instead of my text input, my input block. Okay, cool. So now, like, how do we actually go about doing this? Well, I'm going to make those new references, right? So I'm going to just empty these things out here. And the new references are going to be in the constructor as we've seen before. So structor props, or in a similar fashion as we've seen before, but slightly different. First and foremost, we would say something like this dot text input equals to null. So this is going to be my text input. We'll do that one first. I'll worry about the text area shortly after that. And then what I want to do is say this dot set text input ref, and it's going to be equal to the element. So using an arrow method, or an arrow function rather. So element. Okay, so this is a method that I'm building inside of the constructor itself, and we'll just say this dot text input equals to that element. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to make a method also in the constructor still of focusing the input. So this dot focus text input, and again we're using the arrow method here, and then just say if this dot text input, then we will just say this dot text input dot focus. Okay, so if you haven't seen that before, you can put curly brackets around here if you'd like. You don't have to do that. Okay, so yeah, I can actually write methods inside of this constructor, and this is how you'd write them. So what this allows me to do is quite literally just say component did mount and do this dot focus text input. Okay, so my input block, that's what it is. I'm going to leave out the value here because we haven't defined it. I'm also going to leave out the input change stuff for a moment. Okay, so we've got our reference, and this reference itself would be this dot. Well, the reference is going to be set text input ref. Okay, so why is it that I did it this way versus like the text input? Well, this is actually how you would set whatever that reference is. This method, I mean, if you called this node, yeah, we have the same thing as this right here, right? So again, you see those interchangeable. You see node, you see element. Element makes sense in the component itself because it is an HTTP element, or an HTML element rather, and that allows you to see what's going on just at a glance. Versus down here, this is the specific node, and that's why it's probably more explicit to do it that way. Again, they're interchangeable. I've said that a few times. Okay, so my input block, I can come down here, and let's go ahead and put it right underneath my text input. So my input block, just going to render that out, save it, and oh yeah, I missed one thing. So here's an error. This is something you might be familiar with, or maybe you haven't seen it yet. But it's really cool. I mean, this is super explicit, right? So it's saying put super, just like every constructor that you ever do. Maybe you caught that, maybe not. But React gives just amazing errors. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now that I've got that, there we go. I've got my input block. And notice that it is actually going into your name. So to make sure that I know which one is which, all I'm going to do here is get rid of these. Just cut them out, and I'm going to paste them below here and just put a comment. Okay. Because maybe I want to use them in the future. Probably not. But okay, so now I've got that. My input block refreshes in there, and there we go. So we actually have my input block here, your name, your message, and so on. Pretty nice. Well, what if I actually want to put my text input in there? You know, you could do that too. But how do I actually handle this data being changed, right? So how do I send it back? Well, what did I do before? I just had a method here that handled it for me. So it's not going to be a whole lot different. I'm going to go ahead and copy this handle change. And literally, handle change, if instead of props, it'd be this.props. Okay. So I can also do event and use the, the arrow method of doing it. So this.props.change. There you go. This is actually handling that change. So on change equals to this.handle change. Okay, and again, it's looking for that property. So whatever that property is, and all we have to do here then is handle input change and do on change equals to this.handle input change. Ooh, does that work? Will that actually work for us? Well, let's go ahead and try it out. So I refresh, type out some input. My full name, hey, what do you know? It actually changed. And I hit send message. I've got full name, content. So why is it that it actually did work? Well, there's a couple reasons. Like, why did handle input change work? Which hopefully alarm bells are going off. Maybe not. This is a little bit more advanced. But the reason that it worked is because the names are the exact same. So name here and name here are based off of the original ones, right? So they're still there. So if you wanted to actually handle this change appropriately, you would have to know that those are the names. Now, you could absolutely change these based off of props, and you might end up doing that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's call it input name equals to, and I'll just say name. Or, yeah, so input name and then input text area equals to, or input content name, and we'll just do input name. That's kind of funny, but it kind of makes sense. So let's just say input full name. That's better. Okay, so we called it name here, and I'm going to call this content. Okay, so up here we would want to make those the same, which actually I said name. It's called full name and content. So I'm going back to the same exact value, but I'm changing it to be based off of props instead of hard-coded, which is always a good idea when you make child elements. Okay, so then I'll just say this dot input full name, whatever that is, and then of course this down here is going to be input content name, and of course it's not this dot, it's this dot props dot that, so props dot that. Okay. And there we go. And let's add props here as well. Oops. Okay. So we've changed those things, and now it's a little bit more advanced of a block that you can use. And let's change it from full name and to my full name, just to check to make sure it's all working. It definitely should, but change to my content. And since we've changed those, we want to change everywhere else that full name is there to my full name, and then also wherever content is to my content, which I think is only in one actual place. Okay, so we save that and we refresh in here, or it will refresh for us. And again, I type out Justin, still working, and I hit send message, it shows me those different different values there. Pretty awesome, right? It's really, really straightforward and simple once you work through it. At first glance, it's like, this is complicated, but if you start back with that absolute basics and play around with that a little bit, and then work your way up to this, you start to see that this is pretty cool. Now, this input block itself, like, when would you actually use this input block? Well, I mean, maybe you want uniform contact us blocks everywhere, like wherever they put their, their name and message, or email and message, or username and message, or just message. Wherever you do that, you can use that same block anywhere now. And then you use a different component to handle all of the other parts of what that form would be. This is one of those magical things about React is how just little granular you can get, and just reusable. I think Facebook, Facebook definitely uses React. I think they said they had something around the lines of 50,000 components. 50,000. That's crazy. That's so many components. But this is an example as to why. If you have a big team and you want them to use uniform whatever, now I say on this team, every contact form has to use this input block, and here's where it is. This is how you use it. Boom. It's pretty awesome that's the case. And now you do that for everything, every little piece of your site. You're talking about a very uniform look all throughout. And this is an example of how you can use components with forms in just a different way. Obviously, I have the ability to bring my text input in here as well. I mean, it's not any different than what I've done already. And I would challenge you to try that out, where you do the entire block in there, where you're using a reusable component for another reusable component. Right, so like email might be a thing that you want it to look a specific way as well, or you might want to have like a different language on there or something like that, or you have a different placeholder that you want to test in different areas, all sorts of things. It's pretty cool. Thanks so much for watching. This is pretty much all we're going to be covering right now with forms and inputs. If you have questions on this, please let me know. If you have suggestions or things that you want to see with forms and inputs in particular, let me know as well. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to get everything. I'm going to be doing so many more React tutorials, as you may already know. See you guys next time.